The night felt too quiet, as if the stars themselves were afraid to speak. Cold darkness wrapped around the broken escape pod, drifting between dead worlds. A single human floated inside, barely breathing, staring at the black endless sky. The wreck of a once great ship spun slowly behind him, its lights gone, its crew silent forever. Over 5,000 people had been alive only hours ago. Now only one remained. He pressed his hands against the glass, shaking, his chest rising fast, his mind trying to understand how something could kill so many without firing a single shot. The silence pressed against his ears like a weight, making him feel small and trapped. Outside, a faint shimmer moved across the stars. At first it looked like static, like a glitch in space, but it grew brighter and closer. He blinked hard, thinking it might be the lack of oxygen, but it was real. It pulsed like a heartbeat. The first pulse came gentle, brushing across the escape pod like a soft wave. The second shook the metal shell and made the control panel flicker to life. The third entered his body. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a voice. It was something bigger, something that didn't belong to a ship or a world. It belonged to the universe itself. His vision blurred. For a second he saw nothing but black. Then stars exploded in his mind. Planets burned. Fleets crumbled like dust. Cities screamed in silence. A deep, ancient sound rolled through the darkness, and he felt it crawl through his bones. It whispered one single word, one word that didn't belong to any language he knew. Yet he understood it as if it was carved inside his heart. Destruction. The word struck like lightning through his chest, leaving behind a glowing mark just below his ribs. Bright and warm, as if a piece of a star had sunk into his skin. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The control lights inside the pod flashed wild red. Systems that had been dead for hours suddenly came alive without power. The oxygen pump hummed like it had a mind of its own. A slow, low pulse vibrated through the air, perfectly timed with his heartbeat. He pressed his hand against his chest, feeling the mark burn stronger. It didn't hurt, but it made every nerve feel like fire. Outside, space bent around the pod. Stars stretched, bending like they were being pulled into a black hole, but there was no hole. Just the pulse. He reached for the manual switch to send a distress call, but the console moved on its own. Coordinates he had never seen appeared on the cracked screen. They didn't match any known star system. His hand shook as he tried to override the signal, but every button pressed itself before he could. The message wasn't his anymore. It was the universe speaking through the machine, sending a call he didn't understand. A dark fog gathered outside the pod, moving against the natural flow of space. It wasn't gas. It wasn't dust. It was something alive, something older than galaxies. He pulled the safety straps tighter around his shoulders, trying to steady his breathing. The pulse grew louder, filling his ears like a giant heartbeat. It wasn't coming from inside the pod anymore. It was coming from everywhere. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to shout, but the words died in his throat. Then the fog touched the pod. It didn't make a sound. It didn't leave a mark. But the metal screamed inside his mind. His eyes rolled back for a moment, and he saw flashes. A burned planet floating alone. Ships melting in silence. Stars breaking apart like glass. A hand, not human, reaching through space, placing the mark on his chest. His pulse matched the fog now. His heartbeat was no longer his own. He tried to pull at the straps, tried to fight, but his body wouldn't move. It felt like invisible fingers wrapped around his soul. A low hum filled the air, growing deeper and louder, until it wasn't sound anymore, but pressure. His teeth shook. The pod's hull bent without breaking, as if the universe itself leaned closer to listen. The glow on his chest flared bright white. For a second, it lit the entire pod like a star. Then it spoke again. Not with sound, not with breath, but with the weight of existence itself. Destruction. The word fell inside his mind like a stone into a lake, spreading ripples through everything he had ever known. His breath grew short. His heart beat harder, faster, stronger, as if it was no longer pumping blood, but carrying something else. Outside, the fog spun into a spiral, shaping itself like a mouth without a face. It hovered close to the pod, inches away from the glass. He stared at it, his eyes wide, sweat running down his face, his fingers digging into the straps. The fog pulsed, and the stars behind it disappeared, one by one, not covered, erased, as if something was rewriting reality around him. He felt the cold move through the metal and into his skin, crawling up his spine like icy hands. His breath came out in short gasps, fogging the inside of the helmet. A part of him wanted to close his eyes, to believe it was a nightmare. But deep inside, something else woke up, a spark, a dark, heavy spark that was not his own. His heartbeat steadied, his breathing slowed. The fear inside him twisted into something else, something dangerous. He felt the fog calling to him, not with words, not with reason, but with power, pure, silent, endless power. The pod cracked as if under pressure, but it didn't break. The stars stayed silent. The universe leaned closer, and in that quiet moment between breath and heartbeat, he understood one terrifying truth. The universe hadn't found him by accident. It had chosen him. And whatever had whispered that word into his bones had only just begun. His body felt strange, heavier than before, like something deep inside had changed while the universe was whispering to him. The mark on his chest still burned with quiet light, glowing through the torn fabric of his suit. It wasn't fading. It was growing, pulsing with a rhythm that didn't belong to him anymore. Each pulse sent a cold wave through his blood, and every beat of his heart echoed like a drum inside the tiny pod. He stared at his trembling hands, and for the first time he noticed something new. Thin silver lines ran beneath his skin like veins of light, moving slowly upward toward his neck. They weren't natural. They looked alive. A sudden burst of static filled the pod's cracked speakers. A distant signal broke through the void, sharp and full of fear. He heard human voices shouting through the static, warning about a massive energy wave spreading from his coordinates. A nearby human station had picked it up. They thought it was a weapon. They thought something terrible was coming. They were right. The pod's system displayed a flood of red alerts, and the words, "Unknown source detected," repeated again and again. He tried to shut the signal, but the system ignored him like he wasn't the pilot anymore. It wasn't his pod now. It belonged to whatever was speaking through him. Far away, human command centers scrambled to understand what they were reading. Satellites orbiting the outer colonies lit up with strange signals. Every scanner showed the same thing, a pulse in perfect rhythm, like a heartbeat too large to belong to any living creature. Alien fleets noticed it too. Silent probes in deep space picked up the signal before it reached their borders. Old leaders in distant star systems gathered in hidden chambers. They recognized the pattern. It wasn't the first time the universe had spoken like this. The last time it had happened, half of the galaxy burned. Inside the pod, the glow grew brighter. He felt the mark move like a living thing, spreading warmth into his bones. His mind filled with images he couldn't stop. Dead worlds, floating ruins, shattered fleets drifting through silent space. It wasn't a dream. It was memory. But it wasn't his memory. It was the memory of something older than time, something that had watched civilizations rise and fall like sparks. The fog outside thinned but didn't vanish. It spun slowly around the pod, almost gently, as if guarding its new host. On the human station orbiting the nearest moon, alarms screamed as sensors overloaded. Commanders shouted for ships to move. Dozens of patrol craft launched to investigate the source of the energy. When they saw the broken pod, they thought they had found a survivor. They didn't understand they had found the beginning of something much worse. They tried to open a communication line, but the signal didn't pass through the usual channels. It went straight into their systems, rewriting their codes like fingers tracing on wet glass. One by one, their screens went black except for the same glowing symbol. In the escape pod, his breathing slowed, but the world around him grew louder. He could hear the station signals even without speakers. Words, numbers, heartbeats, all crawling through his head like whispers. He could feel their fear. He could taste it. His pupils widened as he realized the fog wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside him too. The mark on his chest flared bright. For a second, the pulse inside the pod matched the pulse of the entire station, orbiting the moon. Far beyond, in alien territory, fleets that had slept for centuries began to wake. Black ships older than most civilizations started to move. Their leaders watched the signal with grim faces. In their archives, carved into the walls of stone and bone, the same mark glowed faintly, just like the one burning on his chest. They knew the stories. They remembered how the last voice had turned stars into ashes. The pod shook again, but this time it wasn't the pulse. It was the human patrol fleet arriving. Dozens of ships surrounded him, their lights piercing the dark. Voices came through the static. Calm voices, trained, trying to sound in control, but their fear was clear. They told him to stay calm, to prepare for docking, to trust them. But he didn't answer. He couldn't. The fog was still whispering inside his skull. The voice didn't speak in sentences. It spoke in raw emotion. Hunger, power, command. The patrol fleet extended mechanical arms to secure the pod. As soon as metal touched metal, the glow from his chest jumped through the walls like lightning. Every ship around him flickered. Engines failed. Lights went dark. Radios filled with sharp, high-pitched noise. The pilots screamed as their controls froze. It lasted only seconds, but those seconds felt like the sky itself had stopped breathing. When the lights came back, every ship displayed the same symbol. The same word echoed in every helmet: destruction. The station's commander gave the order to lock him down. They didn't care if he was alive or not. They only knew something unnatural was inside that pod. Something strong enough to disable an entire fleet without firing a single shot. Heavy transport arms dragged the pod into the main hangar, and armed soldiers filled the docking bay. Their boots pounded against the metal floor, echoing like drums of war. They didn't know it yet, but they weren't guarding a man anymore. He sat still inside, feeling the mark beating against his chest like a second heart. His breathing was calm now, but not because he felt safe. It was because the fear that had once controlled him was slowly burning away, replaced by something darker. He could feel the universe watching him through the fog. He didn't ask for this. He didn't understand it. But he couldn't fight it anymore. And as the station lights dimmed without warning, the pulse inside him grew louder than ever, ready to spread. Far away from the silent pod, in the black halls of forgotten worlds, the mark that had burned into his chest glowed on old stone walls. Entire star systems trembled as the pulse rolled through the void like a storm. The galaxy had felt this heartbeat before. Long ago, when stars fell like rain and entire civilizations disappeared in a single night, this same signal had echoed. It was not a message, it was a warning, and the oldest empires still remembered what came after. In the golden chambers of a distant alien council, creatures with skin like stone and eyes like molten fire sat in silence. Their translators clicked softly, trying to keep up with the rush of incoming reports. Every sensor, every watchtower, every deep space outpost had detected the same thing, a human signature carrying the oldest signal known. They stared at the projection of the symbol floating above their table, burning slowly like a wound in space. It was the voice of the universe. Last time it rose, half their kind was erased in less than a day. Now it had chosen a human. Fear moved across their faces like a shadow. In the human station, where the pod had been pulled inside, soldiers surrounded the docking bay. Their helmets glowed faint green in the dim light. The air was thick, as if the station itself was holding its breath. Engineers whispered about power surges that didn't make sense. The pulse was everywhere. The sound came through walls, floors, even skin. Medical teams rushed to analyze the lone survivor, but no one dared open the pod. They didn't know if they were looking at a man or a weapon. Inside, he sat still, his hands loose at his sides. The fog outside had faded, but the mark on his chest pulsed like a star trapped beneath skin. He didn't hear voices anymore. He heard memories, not his. They came like waves, sharp and cold, showing him images of ancient worlds collapsing. Massive fleets of alien warships burning into nothing. Crowds on shining cities crying into a sky that turned black. He felt the weight of it, like someone had dropped the history of the universe into his mind. In the control room above the bay, the station commander stared at the readings in silence. Every monitor was flashing the same signal. The energy levels were beyond anything human science had ever recorded. The commander clenched his jaw, trying to stay calm, but everyone in the room could feel it. The air was heavy. Some soldiers felt their hearts beat in rhythm with the pulse. It was as if the universe itself had wrapped its hand around the station and wouldn't let go. Meanwhile, in the dark territories beyond human space, ancient alien fleets stirred. Black ships, shaped like blades, opened their cold engines, cutting through star fields like shadows. Their leaders, creatures older than entire empires, watched the signal with burning eyes. One of them whispered in its own tongue, a phrase not spoken in centuries. The voice has returned. Others followed, their fleets moving silently toward human space. They didn't plan to talk. They planned to stop it before it grew. In the station, they finally opened the pod. The metal groaned as engineers forced the locks apart. Fog slipped out like smoke from an old fire, curling around their boots. The soldiers raised their weapons, fingers tight on the triggers, but he didn't move. He just lifted his head slowly, and when his eyes met the light, they weren't the same anymore. A faint silver glow moved through his veins, crawling up his neck. His heartbeat echoed through the floor, steady, powerful, and unnatural. The medical officer stepped forward with shaking hands. A scanner flickered the moment it came near him. It wasn't detecting a normal human body. It was reading something massive behind him, like a second presence hiding inside his skin. The closer she got, the louder the pulse grew. One of the soldiers panicked and almost fired, but the commander barked at him to stand down. Nobody in that room understood what they were dealing with. But deep down, they all felt the same thing, that this was not just a man. He looked around the bay, his eyes cold and distant. He could hear them talking, but their words felt far away. The whispers in his head had changed. They no longer came as warnings. They came as knowledge. He understood things he had never studied. Coordinates, weapons, star systems that no longer existed. The voice wasn't teaching him. It was unlocking something already inside him. The mark on his chest flared brighter. The lights in the hangar flickered, then dimmed. Across the galaxy, news spread like fire. Every government, every council, every hidden order sent their agents and warships to find the human with the mark. Some wanted to destroy him before the voice awakened fully. Others wanted to control him. A few wanted to worship him. Old legends spoke of the one who could command the pulse and end all light. Some believed he would bring the end. Others believed he would reshape everything. But no one could ignore him. He stood slowly, feeling the pulse inside him like a second heartbeat. It no longer frightened him. It felt natural now, like it had always been there, waiting for the right moment. The soldiers took a step back as the floor vibrated softly. The commander shouted an order to stand firm, but the fear in his voice was clear. Outside the station, in the dark corners of space, fleets closed in from every direction. The voice had chosen its vessel, and the galaxy remembered what happened the last time that choice was made. The stars grew quieter, the pulse grew louder, and somewhere deep in the void, something old and powerful smiled without a face. The night sky around the station began to flicker as if the stars themselves were nervous. At first, it was only a slight tremor in the radar screens. Then the tremor became a wave. The outer scanners went black for 3 full seconds, and when they came back online, the void was no longer empty. A fleet had arrived. Dozens of black ships floated outside the station in perfect silence. No engine trails, no radio signals, no light. They moved like shadows across the stars, their hulls absorbing every beam that touched them. They weren't human ships. They were hunters. And they had come for him. Inside the control room, alarms exploded in every corner. Officers ran between screens, shouting orders. Commanders demanded codes. Every monitor displayed the same cold image of those ships, hovering like predators above prey. They had no flags, no identifications, but their design was older than most human civilizations. Old records whispered their name, Hunter Fleets. Last time they appeared, an entire star system disappeared in a single hour. Down in the docking bay, he stood still, his heartbeat matching the strange pulse that now shook the station. Soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons, trying to look strong, but their hands shook. The lights flickered overhead. The air tasted metallic, as if something was crawling through it. He didn't need the sensors to know they were here. He could feel the hunters before anyone saw them. Their ships beat like distant drums in the back of his skull. The commander's voice cracked through the speaker, sharp and controlled. All units, prepare for contact, shield up, weapons hot. But the truth was written on every face in that room. They all knew the station was too small to stop what was outside. The Hunter fleets didn't negotiate. They erased. As the station's shield came online, the first alien signal cut through space like a blade. It wasn't a normal transmission. It bypassed every frequency and came straight into every ear. A deep layered sound that made hearts skip beats. A single message echoed inside every mind. Release the vessel. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The weight of the voice alone made strong men drop to their knees. Soldiers covered their ears, but it didn't help. Some fell, gasping for air. Others screamed, their helmets cracking from the pressure. He stood in the middle of it all, untouched, breathing slow and steady. The voice didn't crush him. It welcomed him. It sounded familiar, like an old memory he couldn't quite touch. He closed his eyes and felt it slide into his mind like a tide returning to the shore. Outside, the black ships shifted formation. They were ready to strike. The station's main guns pointed at the void, but no one inside truly believed they could win. One blast from a hunter fleet was enough to erase moons. The commander stood in front of the viewing glass, his fists clenched. He didn't know what the man with the mark was, but he knew one thing. If they handed him over, they might live a little longer. If they didn't, they'd burn like the others. In the docking bay, a dozen armored soldiers surrounded him, their weapons locked. Their orders were clear: secure the subject, prepare for transfer. But the closer they stepped, the louder the pulse grew. A deep vibration crawled through the floor, through their boots, into their bones. Some soldiers froze. Some whispered prayers. One dropped his weapon. He lifted his head slowly, and the lights around him dimmed. The mark on his chest flared bright, spreading thin silver cracks along his skin, like lightning trapped beneath the surface. For a moment, everything fell silent. The alarm stopped. The engines held their breath. Even the stars outside seemed to pause. Then it happened. A wave burst from his body without warning. No sound, no flame, just raw force. It moved through the walls like wind through paper. Every light in the station blinked off. The shields that had taken years to build melted away like wax under the sun. Outside, the hunter fleets froze in their positions. One by one, their ships flickered as their engines went cold. From the black behind them, something bigger moved. The void twisted, pulling the light into a spiral. A shape formed, too massive to be a ship, too quiet to be alive. It wasn't coming. It was already here, hiding behind space itself. The hunters lowered their weapons. Even they, ancient and ruthless, didn't dare move. The commander screamed through the comms, demanding someone explain what was happening. But no one could. All they could see was the shape growing behind the stars, its edges made of light and darkness mixed together. The hunters had come to take the vessel. Instead, they had awakened the voice. He felt it deep inside his chest, like a second heartbeat wrapped around his soul. He didn't ask it to come. It came because he was ready. The fog that had once surrounded the pod now stretched through the station like a storm. The soldiers backed away, shaking, their weapons useless. He opened his eyes, and the black reflection of the void stared back through them. The voice didn't speak in words. It didn't have to. It was power older than any fleet. The hunters, who had once burned worlds, now trembled in silence. Outside, the stars bent around the shadow. Inside, the station fell quiet, as if the entire universe leaned closer to listen. The vessel had awakened. The hunters were no longer the predators. They were the prey. The shadow behind the stars kept growing, a shape so massive it made entire fleets look like dust floating on a breath. Its edges shimmered with a strange light, not bright but deep, like the glow inside the heart of a dying sun. The hunter ships that once moved like silent blades now drifted without control, their engines trapped in the invisible current of the voice. The humans inside the station watched the blackness twist and fold, their monitors failing to capture what they were seeing. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a creature. It was something older than both. Inside the docking bay, the man with the glowing mark stood still, breathing slow. The silver lines under his skin spread further, climbing up his neck, reaching his jaw, crawling toward his eyes. His heartbeat no longer matched his body. It matched the void outside. The soldiers surrounding him didn't speak. Some lowered their weapons without even realizing it. Some stared with hollow eyes, caught in the rhythm of a power they couldn't understand. Then the voice came again. Not like before, not in a whisper. This time it filled every corner of space like a storm pressing down on their skulls. Choose. The single word struck through his mind like thunder. He saw flashes, not from outside, but from inside his head. Star systems burning, empires falling, entire fleets kneeling before the same darkness now surrounding him. This power had no mercy. It didn't offer kindness. It gave control. He stumbled backward, clutching his chest, feeling the pulse beat harder than his own heart. Images rushed through him, not like visions, but like memories. He saw himself standing at the center of burning worlds, not as a victim, but as the storm itself. He saw the hunters kneeling. He saw the stars bend, and in that vision his eyes weren't human anymore. They were black, endless, and the universe itself answered to them. Far beyond the station, in the great halls of alien councils, leaders shouted at each other, trying to make sense of what they were seeing on their scanners. Ancient archives spoke of the voice offering a bargain to its chosen. To accept meant power over everything. To refuse meant death. Not only for the vessel, but for anything that tried to contain it. They all knew the story. The last time someone accepted, entire arms of the galaxy turned to ash. The commander in the control room gripped the edge of the screen, sweat sliding down his face. What is it asking? He whispered, even though he knew no one could answer. He could feel the weight of the word echoing inside him too. Choose. The pulse was no longer just around the station. It was inside every mind, wrapping around their thoughts like chains made of light and shadow. Down below, he raised his head slowly, his breathing steady again. The fear that had held him before had burned away, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. He realized the voice wasn't just speaking to him, it was offering him something. The power wasn't outside. It was already inside him, waiting for him to open the door. He looked at the hunter ships frozen outside, and for a moment he felt their fear like it was his own. Even these ancient predators trembled. They were not the masters anymore. The voice pulsed again, and this time it didn't speak in words. It showed him a choice. If he accepted, he could destroy everything that ever hurt him. The empires that ignored his cries. The fleets that left him drifting. The systems that let 5,000 lives be erased without a fight. He could become the hand of the universe itself, or he could refuse and be crushed beneath the same power. There was no safe path. He clenched his fists, the glow on his chest flaring like a small star. The walls around him rattled. The soldiers stumbled backward, some falling to their knees as the air thickened with pressure. Outside, the hunter ships shifted slowly, trying to break free from the pull. Their attempts were useless. The shadow tightened around them like a fist, and then something inside him snapped. His heartbeat steadied. The pulse grew stronger. The docking bay lights shattered one by one as the glow from his body filled the room. His voice came out quiet, almost calm. "I hear you." The shadow outside stirred. It didn't roar. It didn't scream. It simply moved. An entire fleet screamed in its silence. The hunters sent out one last desperate transmission, but it was lost before it reached the stars. They had hunted many things, but never the voice itself. They now understood they were facing something they couldn't control. Inside the station, soldiers dropped their weapons, some covering their ears, some praying, some frozen in shock. The commander whispered orders no one could follow. He could see the man in the bay standing tall now, not shaking, not afraid. His eyes burned silver. The mark on his chest throbbed like a living star. He was no longer trapped between fear and power. He was standing on the edge of something far bigger. The voice whispered one last word, soft as a breath, heavy as a galaxy. Bargain. The walls shook. The stars leaned closer, and he knew that whatever he decided next would not just shape his fate. It would shape the fate of everyone who had ever lived. Far beyond the station, the void burned with movement. Fleets from every corner of the galaxy were racing toward the source of the pulse. Human cruisers, alien warships, raider armadas, and secret vessels from forgotten empires all followed the same signal, pulled like moths toward a fire. The hunter fleets had failed to silence it. Now the whole galaxy was awake. What once was a single man in a broken escape pod had become a storm large enough to make entire civilizations tremble. The human station shook as the first wave of ships dropped out of FTL space. Their engines glowed like suns, their hulls armored with silver, black, red, gold, each color representing a different faction, most of them enemies to each other. But this time, they were united by one thing: fear. The voice had returned. The vessel was human, and if they didn't act now, it would be too late. Inside the control room, alarms screamed without pause. The commander's face was pale, sweat rolling down his temples. "Every major fleet is here," one officer whispered, staring at the radar. "They're not coming to talk." Hundreds of ships surrounded the station, their weapons trained on a single point. They were not allies. They didn't trust each other. But they agreed on one thing: the vessel had to be destroyed. In the docking bay, he stood alone. The glow beneath his skin burned like liquid fire, the silver veins brighter than ever. The mark on his chest pulsed in perfect time with the storm outside. He felt everything, every ship, every mind, every trembling heartbeat in the fleets gathering around him. They thought they were the hunters, but in his bones he could feel the truth. They were the prey, the voice whispered through him, its presence a cold wind behind his thoughts. It didn't push him. It didn't beg. It only reminded him of what he could do. He looked toward the stars, and for a heartbeat he saw them bend slightly, as if reality itself was leaning toward him. The docking bay lights flickered, and the floor vibrated like a drum before a battle. The first attack came fast. A heavy missile from an alien dreadnought slammed against the station's outer shields, exploding in a burst of gold fire. The entire structure shook. Sirens howled. Soldiers ran down corridors, shouting over the chaos. The commander barked orders into the comms, but his voice was lost under the rising storm. More ships opened fire. Beams of pure energy struck the station, tearing holes in its surface. Metal screamed as it twisted and burned. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He closed his eyes. The pulse inside him grew louder, matching the rhythm of the incoming fire. And then, without raising a hand, without speaking a word, something answered. A wave of force rushed out of him, invisible but heavier than any weapon. It passed through the walls like wind through paper, reaching the fleets outside. The first line of warships stopped moving. Their lights flickered. Their engines died. One by one, massive ships that could level planets went silent in the dark. Panic spread through their fleets. Pilots screamed into their radios. Commanders shouted orders, but nothing responded. The pulse was inside their systems. It was inside them. The second wave of ships fired anyway, desperate to end what they didn't understand. Their weapons lit up the void in streaks of fire and light. But before the shots could reach the station, they vanished. The beams bent like water, hitting an invisible wall, swallowed by the growing shadow around him. In the control room, the humans watched the impossible unfold, and then he opened his eyes. The glow was no longer just under his skin. It spilled out into the air, forming a storm of silver light that spread through the bay like liquid smoke. Every soldier around him froze in place, not by force but by instinct. They could feel it now, the same fear that once made galaxies kneel. The voice moved through him, like it had been waiting for this moment for centuries. Across the fleets, panic turned to rebellion. Captains ignored their high councils. Soldiers screamed that the universe itself was fighting them. Alien commanders ordered full retreat, while others rushed forward, hoping to stop him before it was too late. Explosions tore through the darkness as different fleets turned their guns on each other in a storm of fire and betrayal. What was meant to be a united strike became a war between all, but it didn't matter. The voice didn't need to fight them. They were already destroying themselves. He stood at the center of the storm, breathing slow. His heart no longer felt like his own. He could feel the weight of their fear, their anger, their hate. And deep inside, something darker started to rise. A quiet hunger, not for food, not for blood, but for control. With one thought, he could crush entire fleets. With one breath, he could end everything that had ever hurt him. The commander's voice cracked through the speaker, desperate and shaking. "Please, stop this." "You don't have to." But it was already too late. The station's outer layer split open as a wave of raw energy erupted from him, spreading through space like a silent scream. Hundreds of ships were thrown back. Weapons melted in their mounts. Shield generators cracked. It wasn't a clean attack. It was the voice reminding the galaxy what it could do. In that moment, every fleet, every commander, every living soul staring at that station understood one thing with perfect, terrifying clarity. The vessel wasn't trapped. They were, and the storm had only just begun. The stars fell quiet again. Not because the fleets had left, but because they were too afraid to move. Wrecked warships floated through the black void like broken bones, scattered across a silent graveyard. Pieces of hull drifted slowly, their fires burning out one by one, swallowed by the darkness. Thousands of soldiers and pilots held their breath, staring at the single station at the center of it all, not as enemies anymore, but as witnesses to something far greater than war. Inside the docking bay, he stood surrounded by silence. The glow beneath his skin no longer pulsed like wildfire. It had steadied, becoming something cold and heavy, like a heartbeat made of iron. The mark on his chest burned with quiet light, and the fog-like energy wrapped around him like a cloak. He could still feel the voice inside him, patient and endless. It wasn't forcing him anymore. It was waiting for his choice. The voice whispered again, soft but clear. Command. The word slid into his mind like a blade through water. It didn't scream. It didn't threaten. It simply waited. If he gave the order now, the fleets outside would fall like dry leaves in a storm. Every empire that had feared and hunted him could be erased. It would be simple. He wouldn't need armies. He wouldn't need ships. He would become the storm itself. The universe would kneel. The commander in the control room stared down through the glass at him. His hands were trembling, his uniform torn, his face pale. He had watched an entire galactic armada break, like glass, under one man's heartbeat. There was nothing left to fight with, no way to stop what stood in that docking bay. But still, with the last strength in his voice, he whispered through the comm. "You don't have to do this," the words echoed faintly in the hangar. For a long moment, nothing moved. He stared at the floor, at the cracks formed by the pressure of his power, and for a flicker of a second, he saw it. Not the galaxies, not the fleets, but the faces. The ones who had died on that ship. The 5,000 people who had trusted him. The ones who had burned before the voice found him. His jaw tightened, and his fists slowly closed. The voice didn't like hesitation. It whispered louder now, pressing against his thoughts like cold fingers. Command. The lights dimmed again. The temperature dropped. Outside, the fleet shook as the shadow behind the stars stirred. It was ready to finish what had begun, but something inside him wasn't. He stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing against the cracked floor. Every soldier in the bay froze as the silver storm around him shifted. His breath came out steady, no longer afraid but not yet lost. He raised his head, staring at the wreckage beyond the bay doors. All those fleets, every species, every empire, every enemy, had come together because they feared destruction. And here he was, holding the power to give it to them, the voice whispered again. End it, but this time his answer didn't come from fear. It came from the last part of himself that still remembered what it meant to be human. He shook his head slowly. No! The entire station shook as if the universe itself had flinched. The voice pressed harder, sending sharp pain through his chest, but he didn't bend. His heartbeat roared in his ears. The glow around him began to shift, turning from wild silver into something fierce and controlled. For the first time, he wasn't just a vessel. He was something else, something the voice hadn't expected. He drew a deep breath, lifted his hands slightly, and the silver storm wrapped tighter around him like armor. The fleets outside trembled as the massive shadow behind the stars cracked like glass. The voice tried to pull him deeper, but he pushed back. The pulse that had once been its control became his. A sound like thunder rolled through space. The black shape behind the stars shuddered, splitting apart into shards of darkness that scattered like smoke in wind. The fleets watched in stunned silence as the impossible happened. The voice was breaking. He let the last surge of power flow through him, not as a weapon, but as a rejection. The pulse spread through the void, not burning or destroying, but silencing the storm. One by one, engines restarted. Shields flickered back to life. The shadow was gone. All that remained was the man standing alone in the docking bay, breathing hard, sweat on his forehead, silver fading slowly from his veins. Across the fleets, commanders lowered their weapons. No one spoke. No one moved. The galaxy had come to destroy a monster, and instead, they had seen one refuse the crown offered by the universe itself. The commander in the control room stared at him through the glass, barely able to speak. You stopped it, he whispered. He looked back, his eyes tired but steady. No, he said softly. I just didn't let it win. Outside, the stars flickered to life again. The voice was gone. But the silence it left behind wasn't peace. It was waiting. Far away, in the deep places where light never touched, something old and endless listened. And though the storm had been broken, its echo whispered faintly in the void. The universe hadn't given up. It had only gone quiet. For now.